My pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Peter Interligia is President and COO of Invesco Canada, the Canadian subsidiary of Invesco Limited. He also oversees North American client operations in Invesco. Peter began his business career at Thomas Cook and subsequently worked for Capgemini Ernst & Young Lowen Group Incorporated, which is now known as Alterwoods Group, and CIBC in the global private banking and trust business. Peter joined AIM in 1999 as Vice President of Corporate Research and Development. He spearheaded the growth strategy for AIM in Canada, resulting in the $2.2 billion acquisition of Trimark Investments in 2000. In 2000, Peter became Vice President of Marketing and was then appointed Senior Vice President of Marketing of Client Services. In 2002, he was appointed Senior Vice President of Corporate Operations, and Peter assumed global responsibilities for Invesco's client operations in early 2006, and also in 2008 was appointed President of Invesco Canada. Peter will now come forward and walk us through a fact or opinion exercise on the banning of embedded compensation. Of course, Peter will be picking up on several of the points that were raised during our fees panel. Please welcome to the stage Peter Interligia.
Well, actually, listening to the tail end of that panel discussion got me pretty fired up for this, because I have my parents immigrated to Canada, and the mere suggestion that because they don't have a lot invested means that they don't get access to quality advice actually strikes me at a real personal level, because I think they deserve as much access as a higher net worth investor. So for what it's worth, I wanted to make that comment. First of all, I want to say thank you to Ed and the team at Advocis for inviting me to participate in today's symposium. It's a real honor to be able to come and express our thoughts and ideas and some of our research on topics that are quite meaningful, both to investors and obviously to our industry. But more importantly, it gives us an opportunity to engage in a question and answer period. For those of you that know me well know that I much prefer a Q&A style discussion over going through a PowerPoint slide presentation. So that said, I will get through my slides quickly, leaving enough time for some questions and answers as well. You're probably wondering, what on earth does Razz Kids have to do with regulatory affairs? And if you bear with me for a second, Razz Kids actually inspired this particular presentation. I have 4 children, one of them an 8-year-old in grade 2, and Razz Kids is actually a repository of books. Children log on, they pick a book, the book is narrated to them, then they read and record themselves reading the book, and then take a quiz. The quizzes are usually 10 to 12 questions, but what I found fascinating and very interesting were 2 to 3 questions in every quiz required the child to read a statement and determine whether the statement was based on fact or opinion. And it sounds easy enough, because all of us know that facts are objective and opinions are subjective, but I'm embarrassed to admit I actually didn't get some of the questions correct. And I thought, hey, later that evening when I sat down to start the slides for this particular presentation, I thought, what an interesting exercise. Rather than me coming up to the podium and talking about all the reasons why I think banning embedded compensation doesn't make any sense, let's do the reverse. Let's look at the 4 arguments, the 4 most common arguments that I've heard for banning embedded comp, and let's do a critical assessment of each statement and determine whether the statement is based on fact or opinion. So if you like, you can play along as we do this. What I'll do is I'll put 4 statements on the screen. You can jot down for yourself whether you think the statement is a fact or an opinion. I'll walk you through my assessment and the thought process I went through. And at the end, we can see whether we were aligned and use that as a platform for our Q&A discussion. So the first argument or statement that I'm going to put up is that trailing commissions, advisors gravitate to higher trail mutual funds. Now, a little bit of context before you decide whether this is a fact or opinion. The argument here is that all things being equal, if an advisor is faced with a recommendation to either recommend product A that pays an enhanced trailer in excess of 1%, versus a similar fund that pays a standard 1% trail, they will always opt for the higher trail product. And if you ban embedded compensation, the logic goes that since in a fee-based account it's one rate, then you eliminate the inducement or the incentive that an advisor has to recommend that higher trail fund. So here's the exercise I went through to determine fact or opinion. I'm a hobbyist, and I like to pull out my telescope from time to time and check out the skies. For those of you who do the same thing, you'll note that this planet here is Jupiter. It's the largest planet in our solar system. And I want this particular planet to represent all of the mutual funds that pay a trailing commission of 1% or less. That represents about 1,800 mutual funds. And these are only equity mutual funds. I didn't want to skew the data by including a bunch of fixed income funds that pay a lower trail. The planet that best represents, relative to Jupiter, the number of products that pay an enhanced trail in excess of 1% would actually be the planet Earth. There's about 200 of those funds. What's really interesting when you take a deeper look at the funds in this category is you find they divide up into two different categories. The first is more than half of the funds that pay an enhanced trail are actually proprietary products sold through captive distribution channels. So that is companies that manufacture product, have an added incentive for their sales force to recommend mutual funds with an enhanced trail. If you put those aside, and by the way, from my perspective, I think if we want to have a debate or discussion around conflicts of interest, I do think that does create an inherent conflict of interest, but let's put that aside for a second. If you only look at the third-party mutual funds that are available to be recommended by advisors, the relative size of that group would actually be Mercury. There's only about 70 of those funds. And you might look at this screen and say, well, hold on a second, Peter. You know, the cynics in the audience will say, wait a second. That tells us the relative size of the number of products. But what it doesn't tell us is whether advisors are piling their clients into these higher trail funds. Because on the one hand, we have the largest planet in our solar system representing funds that have a 1% or less trail. And on the other hand, we have the smallest planet in our solar system, because Pluto was demoted, it's no longer a planet, representing the number of funds that have an enhanced trail attached to it. Now, if you're going to make the argument that clients are being piled into the higher trail funds, my first reaction would be, well, that defies the laws of economics, because as we know, in economics, as demand increases, so too does supply. So if advisors like yourselves were demanding higher trail products, you would expect to see a lot more of these types of products available. But let's entertain the notion that all clients are being piled into these higher trail products. What we did as a firm is we said, look, the only way to answer this question and to determine whether it's a fact or not is to go out and do a survey. We needed to get a better idea of the breakdown of an advisor's book of business. And when we went to market, we actually had 2,700 advisors. Many of you in the room participated in that survey. I think it's actually one of the largest of its kind in this industry. And what we found was that only 8% of clients had an average trailing commission in excess of 1%. That ratio is smaller than the ratio of products. So clearly, the rules of economics are alive and well here. Not only is there no demand for these products, but clearly advisors such as yourselves are not putting your investors in these clients. If anything, in my experience with advisors, I would tell you that the vast majority of advisors I've worked with tend to avoid the higher trail products, even if they believe that it may generate better returns, but they would actually opt for the standard 1% trail mutual fund commission. All right, so bottom line here, I think this particular statement is more opinion than fact. If you look at it grammatically, it's written as a fact, but it's actually an opinion disguised as a fact. I think with improved fee transparency, with the amendments to 31103, and greater investor awareness around the costs of their investments you eliminate the need to have to ban embedded compensation to address this particular issue. Let's move on to the second statement. Most investors don't know how their advisor gets paid, fact or opinion. Now, another way to think about this is that investors think that their advisor is free, that there actually is no cost associated with advice. The context here is that if you ban embedded compensation, then you address this particular issue because everybody would be investing in Series F version of a mutual fund, right? And there are flat rates, and clearly at whether it's a monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, or annual basis, the client will see upfront what their cost of investing is, or at least the cost of the associated cost of advice. So we felt that in order to determine here whether this is fact or opinion, we needed to do more research. So as an extension to the work that we did on the advisor survey, we thought the only way to determine the answer here is to actually ask clients. Ask them their thoughts. And so we created a couple of videos. I think some of you in the audience here today have seen these investor-friendly videos. The idea was to educate investors, to show them the difference between how an advisor is paid when the cost of advice is bundled into the cost of their mutual fund versus working with an advisor in a fee-based account. And after watching the video, we asked the investors a couple of questions. Now, it's still early in the survey process. I have some early results for you. But I thought what we'd do is take a quick look at Part A. We don't have time to go through both Part A and Part B, but I can tell you Part B is a repeat of the first part, the only difference being that we show a dollar breakdown. So we'll watch the video, and then I'll walk you through some of the results that we've found so far.
Let's face it, investing can be complicated. That's why you've chosen to work with a financial advisor. Someone who can make sense of the changing world of investments and help you reach your financial goals. Many Canadians admit that they don't know exactly how their advisor is compensated for their services. New regulations aim to clear up some of this confusion. So how does your advisor get paid? The cost of advice is paid in one of two ways: bundled into the total cost of your mutual fund, or negotiated and paid directly by you to the dealership your financial advisor is affiliated with. If you're not sure which applies to you, just ask your financial advisor. They'll be happy to provide clarity. Let's take a look at how bundled compensation works. When you invest in a mutual fund, your money goes to work for you right away. There are costs which are calculated and retained by the mutual fund company annually. These costs pay for investment management and account administration, as well as the costs associated with professional financial advice. This portion of your mutual fund cost is passed along to the investment dealership your advisor is affiliated with. Your advisor is normally paid a percentage of the amount received by the dealership. The dealer's portion covers the costs associated with administration, compliance, and oversight. The advisor's portion pays for any number of services they may provide, as well as their business operating costs. Let's return to the other method of payment. What happens when you choose to pay for advice directly? Once again, the money you invest in a mutual fund goes to work for you right away, and a portion of your investment is retained to pay for investment management and account administration services. However, in this case, the fund company does not collect and pass through any costs associated with financial advice. Instead, these costs are paid by you directly to the dealership your advisor is affiliated with. The fee is negotiated between you and your financial advisor. The rate you'll pay is dependent on the services you choose to receive. Your advisor is normally paid a percentage of the annual fee you negotiate. In summary, there are two ways you can pay for the cost of advice. One option is to have it bundled in the cost of your mutual fund, or you may choose to pay for the cost of advice separately to the dealer your advisor is affiliated with. Ultimately, whether bundled or direct, the method of payment that best suits your needs is your choice. Regardless of how an advisor is paid, it's important that you are provided with choice and transparency. If you understand the services your advisor provides and the costs of those services, the value of the advice you receive will be evident. To find out more about investment costs, talk to your advisor.
So just some quick highlights here. First of all, the feedback, both from advisors and a lot of the commentary verbatims that we're getting from investors has been overwhelmingly positive. I think we've found a way to explain a fairly complicated subject in 3 minutes or less. But I do want to share some statistics with you. So far, of the respondents to the survey, we've got about 430 respondents. We expect this to exceed well over 1,000 by the time we close the survey off, which is in mid-November. And rates have been picking up. But here are some of the early results. 15% of investors that have taken the survey have not had a compensation discussion with their advisor. That number is actually higher than I'd expected. I know it's present company included, excluded, that we've all had these kind of discussions with our clients. But so far, 15% have said they haven't had comp discussions. 51% said they were unaware of the various fee options that existed. So they weren't, if they were invested in mutual funds, they weren't aware that there was a fee-based option and vice versa. Here's an interesting one. 88% want to know the cost of advice in dollar terms. This is a real tip of the cap to the regulators here, that the amendments to 31103, there's a real desire for this information. And I think all of us would agree that when you're paying for a service, it's a natural thing to want to know exactly how much it's going to cost you in dollar terms. So again, this is pretty evident in the data. Here's, I think, one of the most important takeaways. 80% of those that have been asked actually say they would prefer to pay for advice through the mutual fund fee as opposed to negotiating it and paying it separately. Now, the reason I say this is an important point is what we were looking for was a connection between the advisor survey and the investor survey. And what we found was in the advisor survey was about 80% of advisors were using mutual funds as their primary source of compensation with their clients. So what this shows is that 80% of investors that they're servicing agree with that. That basically means that the conversations or advisors in a free market, or advisors are fitting the needs of the client and putting them in a vehicle that does best suit their needs. And perhaps the most compelling data point so far that we've received is 80% of the respondents, they want to make the choice between embedded and fee-based. They don't want a regulator, they don't want consumer advocates, they certainly don't want mutual fund companies or advisors telling them how they should pay for advice. They want to be empowered to make the decision on their own. And so our conclusion here is that, yes, this statement is a fact, that many investors are not aware of how their advisor get paid, but the solution isn't to take away choice and flexibility. The solution clearly is transparency and education. We collectively have a responsibility, whether you're in the investment management business or you're a dealer or Advocis or IFIC or any of the other industry bodies. Our responsibility is to educate, not to limit choice. Let's take a look at the third statement. Investors pay too much for advice. So I'll let you think about whether that's fact or opinion. Now, I guess the context here would be that if you ban embedded compensation and everybody goes to fee-based, that investors will be in a better position to negotiate fees. The more people you have negotiating fees, the higher the likelihood that the rates will come down. That's the logic. My process here was to look at some data, and I had mentioned the advisor survey a moment ago, and I want to walk you through some of the findings that we've seen. First, the small investor and is paying roughly $81 a month for professional advice. And by the way, these numbers are the payments made to the dealer, not the share that goes to the advisor, because of course there's a grid payout. And for example, if you're on a 50% grid, that $81 would be $40.50 to the advisor. Large investors pay on average $221 for advice. And by way of just to describe the difference between large investors and small investors, the way we defined it was a large investor would be an investor in the top 20% of your book, and a small investor would be in the next 80% of the advisor's book. So the average assets for a large investor was about $240,000. For the small investor, about $80,000 to $84,000. The other thing we uncovered is that typically in an advisor's practice, they don't typically set out certain services for specific clients. What they normally do is they say, okay, in my practice, we're going to do financial planning, retirement planning, investment planning, insurance, education planning, et cetera. What we looked for in the survey were any services that were provided to 75% or more of their clients, and those were the services I just read out. And there were other things like business planning and so on that were much smaller and very specific to certain clients, but weren't a broadly shared resource. So the conclusion is that, and I know this is nothing new to any of you, but small investors are actually being subsidized by the larger investors. In other words, they have access to the same professional advice and the same services of those paying multiples in absolute terms versus themselves. And this goes back to the comment I was making earlier that I think even the small investor, I would actually argue that smaller investors require better advice than those that have large accounts. I actually would take the reverse. Bottom line is, let's make sure that everybody has access to professional financial advice, not just based on the size of your portfolio. The next thing is that, as I mentioned, small investors are being subsidized by the large. So my conclusion here was that none of these data points actually prove out that the small investor would be able to negotiate better fees in a fee-based environment. For that, we have to look at the aggregate results. And so here's the data in aggregate. In Canada, the average mutual fund holder is $110,000. The investor's paying roughly 1.13% of assets, and that's in total fees, not just trailer fees. So that would include any commissions paid on DSC or low load forward, et cetera, or any commissions even charged on front end. So that averages out to about $109 a month. And what we did for comparison purposes, because we'd like to know in an environment where it's predominantly fee-based, what are the types of fees that those clients are paying? And for that, we looked at the United States, because as you know, in the United States, well over 80% of investors are in a fee-based environment. And so in the United States, if you have a portfolio between $250,000 and $500,000, and this is validated by two separate sources, one being Cerulli and the other being Price Metrics, the average fee paid is between 1.2% and 1.5%. So that's averages about $300 to $500 a month. Clearly, being in a fee-based environment doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have better rates. It actually reminded me of an article I read in the National Post. John Ivison wrote it, and it was about a month or so ago. And he said that they had uncovered a secret government document that shows that Canadians are paying on average 15% more for goods in Canada versus their counterparts in the United States. I think clearly professional advice is not one of those costs. I think Canadians actually are getting exceptional value because there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the advice that's being provided in the United States is any less of quality than the advice that's being provided here in Canada. So ultimately, I think this particular statement is an opinion. We do need to let the markets continue to dictate pricing. By that, we mean we operate in a free market. Let's continue to support that. Okay, the fourth and final statement is that the do-it-yourself investors pay a fee for a service they're not receiving. And the idea here is that if you ban embedded compensation, then everybody is buying Series F version of the fund. There's no more Series A or DSC or any of the other purchase options. And that clearly, if fees are being charged at the account level, it's going to be one fee for a person who's receiving advice versus another fee for someone who's choosing to do it on their own. Now, clearly Invesco and myself personally have very strong biases. Now, we're going through this exercise of fact and opinion, so let me put my opinion out first, and then we'll get to these statements. We obviously support the financial advisor channel. We believe strongly that every investor should seek financial advice. And let me give you an example. I have a friend of mine who he happens to be the smartest person I know. He's brilliant, and he runs the global equity derivatives desk at one of the 5 banks, fully capable of managing his own portfolio. Some time ago, he called me up and said, "Hey, Pete, I just got a call from my advisor." He said, "Have you set up a family trust yet?" And I said, "Well, actually, I have one, but why are you calling in?" He said, "Well, the tax rules are changing." And he said, "If you didn't have it set up, you better get around to it." And what it pointed out to me was, here's a guy who clearly has all the tools, skills available to him to pick products, whether it's stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs. But that's not the value the advisor is providing for him. The value was that he just doesn't have the time to stay on top of all of these rule changes, et cetera, that actually benefit him and his family longer term. And that's why, as a firm, and even myself personally, I think investors are much better served when they're getting advisors. That said, I think that we have to acknowledge that there are people that are going to want to do things on their own. My brother-in-law, he's a mechanic. And the very thought of sending his car in to be repaired by someone else, he would say is ridiculous. He's going to buy the parts and do it himself. And I personally wouldn't even dream of trying to fix my car on my own. But can you imagine walking into Canadian Tire and buying some parts and then getting your bill and it says that'll be $50 for the parts and another $75 for labor, and you say, but I didn't get my car repaired here, why am I paying the labor costs? And that's the frustration, I think, of the do-it-yourself channel, because when we look at the market, we acknowledge that mutual funds are an outlier in the DIY channel. So today, you can buy stocks, bonds, ETFs. Typically what will happen is they're commission-based. Depending on the size of your account, you may pay $6 to $10 per trade. But mutual funds, for the most part, and there are some exceptions to this rule, companies that do sell their mutual funds directly to the end consumer. But for the most part on the online brokerage channel, they are purchasing mutual funds that have an embedded trail in the cost of the mutual fund. Now, there are some banks that offer a discounted trail series. I know RBC has Series D, and I believe TD has Series E. But again, the vast majority of third-party products don't offer this particular option. So my conclusion here is that, yes, this is a fact, and we do need to address it, but the solution isn't banning embedded compensation, because when you look at the DIY channel, it is a very small segment of the market. It's $30 billion versus the $800 billion of advised assets. So clearly, taking a draconian solution to address this small segment of the market just isn't a wise thing to do. So our solution here would be to acknowledge that it is a shortcoming in the industry, and that we would call upon the fund companies to work with the online brokers to address this shortcoming. So in summary, here are the 4 statements and the conclusions I came to. But what I would say is that our market is best served by ensuring choice and transparency, making sure that investors are empowered to make decisions that they feel are in their best needs. I'd like to conclude my comments there and take questions if there are any. Thank you.
If the statistics presented and the findings are accurate between the fee-based and the embedded-based models, then what, in your opinion, is the major impetus for the debate between the 2 structures that we have here in Canada?
Well, it goes back to the theme of the presentation, and you saw a lot of it on the panel. I think a lot of the debate is fueled by personal biases and opinions. I think it's important for all of us to recognize issues, be more thoughtful in how we tackle issues, because it is, I guess the analogy I would use is, you ever get in an argument with your spouse and you find yourself digging in and as you're arguing, you're realizing that you know what, I'm wrong. But you keep arguing your point anyway. I think that's actually what's happened in the industry here. I think fund companies, we're just as guilty as the other end of the spectrum. I think those that are staunch believers in do-it-yourself, you hear the argument on passive versus active. It's not just this notion of banning embedded comp versus keeping it. I think people do get very entrenched in their points of view. I think this debate and discussion needs to be level-headed, fact-based, and let's be thoughtful. And let's give in areas and let's acknowledge where we've got some shortcomings. I think that's ultimately the best long-term outcome for investors, advisors, the industry alike.
Hi, Peter.
Hi there.
I thought that was a fantastic presentation, by the way, so thank you very much. My question to you relates to, I guess, where the market is going and how Invesco reacts to it. Do you view discount brokerages and do-it-yourselfers as a threat to your business model, or is this just, entrepreneurs, business, the market determining where there are voids and filling them, and how does that impact the decisions that you're making internally?
Yeah. I see the DIY channel as no threat whatsoever to the advice channel. Let me explain. And this doesn't come from my own personal opinion. This actually comes through discussions with advisors like yourself. I actually went to see an advisor who had noted in our response to the 81407 paper that we had said we would support a DIY series. And he actually called me and said, hey, just wondering if you can give me a little bit of background on your position here. I'd like to understand it. And as we got talking, it was interesting to watch or to listen to him. He actually said, I'm kind of tired of being painted with the brush as being a product salesperson. He said, frankly, I'm sick of it. It insults what I do with my clients. I provide them with an invaluable service, whether it's financial planning or investment planning or education planning. He said, I don't sell them product. It's the last thing I think about. So the reason for his call was how do we actually get back to putting the spotlight on what advisors actually do for their clients, and as opposed to the extreme negative view, meaning that advisors are really only out to make an extra buck in commission by pumping product. I think the days of the mutual fund salesperson are way behind us. I think that was a 10-year ago or 15-year ago phenomena. And I think that the pressure on advisors to continue to improve the degree of expertise or knowledge that they have or they bring to their clients is going to continue to improve. So the DIY channel is a non-threat whatsoever. Frankly, from our perspective, you asked what's Invesco's view. I would see it as a money-losing venture, but if we're going to defend choice, we can't do it at the expense of a certain segment. It stinks of hypocrisy to do that. So that's where we stand. Sorry. Yeah.
Hi, Peter. Thank you for your presentation. It was a terrific and concise look at the way compensation mechanisms can work. A quick comment and a question. Do you think that when you talked about reducing fees on the DIY distribution channel, that fund companies should be forced to do that, or should they simply be able to choose not to participate in that process?
Yeah, it should be a choice, obviously, to the fund companies to participate or not. My view is that they should think long and hard about not participating because it sends the wrong message. I think that we have to acknowledge that, listen, we're proponents of advice and we think every investor should be working with a financial advisor, but not everybody will or would want to. So yes, it should be up to them, but again, this goes back to the comment I made earlier. We can dig our heels in, but it doesn't address the issue, and I just feel that if we're going to leave gaps in our argument and our discussion, then it really points to maybe there is a conflict here, and the regulator needs to step in and say, look, we're going to do it this way so that everybody's treated fairly. Oh, sorry, he had one. Okay, go ahead. Ken?
Oh, hi, Peter. You're my favorite fund CEO, and I mean this in the nicest way. I think you guys are trying to get out in front. You've already made a suggestion that many in the industry oppose, the suggestion about discount brokers. That's the kind of simple things that can be done. There's still an issue of you guys doing a study. This is good. There's, of course, a study that shows, I think the Polaris study from IFIC showed that over 40% of people prefer to pay their fee directly, and that's the 2013. In 2011 was 31%. So there's a growing percentage that want their fee. The IAP study, as you know, was overwhelming. So there's a conflict of studies, but there's a trend in my mind that more people want this. My issue is, you say that, and you've said it in your submission, that the larger investors in a mutual fund are subsidizing the smaller. And that's a great social thing. And, you know, like I was pretty hard-nosed up there when I said that, but I really do believe a RIF person like myself does need more advice than someone with $20,000 of assets. We can debate that, but I think I do. But why should they subsidize? Why doesn't the firm do the subsidy and or change the break points? Give the bigger investors break points that are not $1 million. Why should they do the subsidy? They didn't invest in mutual funds to really do that.
Yeah, I think, okay, so I guess a couple of things. First, on the break points, I believe that every fund company does offer higher net worth pricing. I know we do. And once you hit a certain level, there is a discount that's provided at the management fee level. That's basically our discount, not a discount on the trailing commissions. So those models absolutely do exist, and there is an acknowledgement that as you grow your book of business, or as an investor invests more in your products, you should provide them some fee breaks. So that does exist. With regards to the studies that you mentioned, I agree that there's always going to be conflicting points of view, but I think the key takeaway, and Ken, I think you're absolutely right, that over the long term, fee-based investing will continue to grow in Canada. It's been growing for a number of years, and I don't expect it to slow. But I think the bottom line there is that if you want to go the fee-based route, that should be your choice, and if you want to be invested in mutual funds, that should be the choice of the investor too. And it's that flexibility that we want to maintain and support.
Peter, I just wanted to ask you a question that was discussed a little bit at the end of the panel before your presentation, and that's with respect to regulatory arbitrage. And I just wanted your views on, do you think that currently regulators are targeting your industry, and do you think that they're trying to pick winners and losers? And we've had some governments that try to pick winners and losers, through tax subsidies or through various kinds of other incentives and subsidies. But how do all the different business models come out of this? Should regulators ban embedded commissions? Are there some that are likely better to succeed? And do you think that's going to be a big problem for your business model?
First, on the first question, I don't think the regulators are targeting our industry. I think they look at it in absolute terms and say you've got, there's $800 billion in assets. It's obviously a vehicle of choice for investors, and clearly it requires the attention and focus of our regulators. Now, that being said, I don't think that our industry's reputation is where it needs to be. I think in general, when you read, say for example, 81407, there are some, I guess the tone of the comment letter, I would say, skews towards the negative, both in terms of the fund companies and the advice channel. And so I think when there's a negative perception, you obviously get more, hand-wringing and thought around what can we do to try to improve things. So I do think we need to continue to partner with the regulators to make them aware of all the great things that we do. We're easily one of the most regulated industries in the country. And I think we do a lot of terrific work. I think we do need to remind them of the work that we are doing. And in terms of the impact on us if embedded compensation is banned, and this is where I think the irony exists. From a fund company perspective, you would expect us to actually support a ban on embedded comp. Let me explain why. The margins on our business go up dramatically in a fee-based series. Because when you're supporting low load for DSC, those are all coming out of the management fee and create a downward pressure on your margins. Not to cast stones, but I think a lot of our competitors who are remaining silent on this issue are looking at just that and saying, at the end of the day, we can support advice, but if it all goes fee-based, no big deal for us, because you look at the United States, for example, there's still a huge demand for managed product. So I don't think that demand's going to go away. Our motives here in Invesco are pure. I can tell you that unequivocally, that we believe that the structures that exist are in the best interests of a healthy industry and are in the best interests of investors. And that's why we're supporting this cause. That's why we're making concessions where we think there are gaps to be closed. But I don't think a ban on embedded comp is going to materially impact independent investment managers like ourselves longer term. Yep.
Hi there, Peter. Thank you very much for the presentation. That was excellent. I have a comment for one of the other presenters who had a question earlier, Ken. You indicated that you need more advice being a RIF investor. And, I look at my practice, and my practice is one where I offer clients choice. They can choose to work with me on a fee-for-service basis where I provide them a financial plan. They can choose to deal with me on a commission basis where they don't see any fee, it's an embedded commission, or they can choose to deal with me on a front-end load basis with 0% upfront. Now, I do guide my clients in making their choices, and I tell them what's more expensive for them and what is less expensive for them. Clients who have a lower amount of assets with me get one meeting every year. They sit down with me, they get advice. Clients who have more money with me get 2, 3, and sometimes 4 meetings a year. So there is choice out there for people if they look for it. And if clients don't want any advice, then certainly there is the discount brokerage route that they can go. It's all there for them. That's all.
Great, thank you for your comment. I think I'm getting the hook here. So thank you very, very much for the time, and I'll be around during break if you'd like to chat further. Thanks again.